Welcome back to Creative Evolution. I'm your host, Stephen Hogan. It is a pleasure to have you here. Please hit subscribe if you can. That will help us greatly. Did you ever hear that song, Applebee's? Maybe you heard it in an Applebee's commercial. It went like, Applebee's on a date night. Yeah, you heard it. All right, check this out. Imagine working your whole life on an instrument and then moving to Nashville, knowing absolutely no one and having to figure out what it takes to go from playing in the basement to playing in arenas at the highest level that any musician could possibly achieve. In this episode, we're going to talk about his multifaceted career journey, wearing multiple hats, talking about the challenges, and this is one I found very interesting because he gives his top piece of advice for anybody that's looking to do what he is doing. Please welcome my guest, Luke Dejaynes. The latest has been the being on tour. Mm-hmm. I would like you to just explain a little about maybe what that experience is like and how you got that gig in the first place.
Yeah, it's wild, and I would say probably my story is different than some people's, but also the idea is probably the same for most people that you talk to who move to town and get gigs. And that is just, you just need to meet everybody. And then, sometimes I look back and I don't even remember how I ended up in a certain situation, because it's like I have to connect the dots of like, how did I meet this person who led me to that person who led me to this person, and then kind of like our story, Yeah. But that really is it. It was like the relationships were the key to connecting dots for me to get certain gigs. Specifically, this gig with Walker, it was really unique. This has to do with you, actually. It's crazy.
Really?
Because the first gig I think I played with you was that Steamboat Days gig in Iowa.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think maybe it was the keyboard player we had.
Okay.
I don't know. His name was Lucas. Okay. I don't know if that was... Anyway, I'm pretty sure we were on the same gig.
It was either that or Floribama.
That's what it was.
Okay.
He just was randomly hired on that gig. I didn't know him. It's the first time I met him. First time I met you. And we played well together as well. And he said, hey, what are you doing next Wednesday? This is probably 2013. And he said, what are you doing next Wednesday? And I said, nothing. I'm brand new to town. He said, I play for a guy named Walker Hayes. We play for free at Puckett's. We get free food and we just play while the crowd eats. And I was like, cool. See you there. See you Wednesday. And I showed up. Walker and I hit it off, and I started doing that. And I did that for like 2 years. And my brother started playing with us. And eventually we just became a trio, Walker and my brother and I, and we did that for 2 years straight, just played for free food. And it was fun. But eventually that ended and parted ways. But to fast forward the whole story, I had that relationship with Walker, and we had worked on stuff together. And, fast forward a whole bunch of stories, and I was off the road. I hadn't been on the road since 2018. I decided, I was just going to focus on studio and life and whatever else.
Yeah, because you have kids and a family.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so I just kind of got to that place where I felt like I think I'm going to call it quits on the touring side. And so I hadn't been touring, and then 2 years ago, so 2022 February, I got a call, and it was Walker, and he was like, hey, would you ever consider coming back out on the road? And I said, not for very many people, but I would for you. Now, what I didn't tell was that Walker went from playing for free in restaurants to being like a huge superstar in between that time that we had seen each other and worked together. So at this point, he's playing really big shows and just off the tails of a massive hit. And so it was still a tough decision, but it made a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. It was a successful gig with someone who had a long friendship with, and also my brother was already playing for Walker. And so I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, I don't think you can come up with enough excuses to say no to this, And so that's how it came back. But the moral of that story is it's because I just said yes to some random guy inviting me to a free jam thing on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And that's why 10 years later, I'm sitting here and have that gig.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's really cool, man. It's crazy because everybody I've talked to so far has said, meet everybody you can meet.
yep.
Because I guess it's a cliche, but they say Nashville's a small town.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's true.
Yeah.
You know? So for people that want to move here that aren't here, that are like, man, I want to like get that gig. I want to be on the road for artist or like a superstar. But what are some of the realities of actually being on the road? Because it seems really glamorous when you're on stage for an hour and a half, you know, and you're headlining. But what happens the other 22 and a half hours of the day? You know?
And that, you just nailed it, man. I mean, that's why it's hard. You know, it does look glamorous, and it is glamorous for that 90 minutes. You know, you're in front of thousands of people, you're in venues that you've only dreamed about being in, and you know, and I have it great. I can't complain about anything. We have great crew and techs, and like, I don't have to set up my drums. I don't say that arrogantly. It's just, I've never experienced any of that before either. That's the stuff as a kid you dream about, like having a tech and riding on cool tour buses and like all that stuff. And it's great. So it's easy to forget that because there is a lot that's really hard about it.
What are some of those things?
Well, I think it depends on what stage of life you're in. I think it's harder now for me because I'm 44, and I've got 3 kids and a wife, and those things just start to become more and more of your priority. Not that they weren't before, but when you're young and you're in your young 20s, you just want to go out and take on the world, and you want to accomplish all these things. And I still am motivated to accomplish things, but also I don't count on those things just for my the entirety of my joy and my identity anymore.
Yeah.
Where I once did. So my point being is, I think at certain times of life, it's easier to do a job like that, to be on the road, to be on a tour bus, live out of a suitcase in hotels and whatever. But those are the things. Boredom is not something I do well with. And like you said, there's 22 hours of a day where I'm literally have nothing to do. I mean, you can try to find something to do, but most of the time you're isolated somewhere without much transportation. A lot of times there's not anywhere you can be private because you're always either in a bus with a bunch of other people or in a green room with a bunch of other people. So it's hard to find things to fill your time. And some people enjoy that, just lounging and hanging. And I do to a certain extent, but the boredom and the unproductivity is what really I have a hard time with.
Yeah.
So, and then
I would think that's most people.
Probably so.
You get stir crazy.
Yes.
Unless you're on Tim McGraw's tour and you work out twice a day or whatever
Yeah.
he does.
I could do that, but I choose not to. But
do you guys bring it? Is there a trainer on the tour?
We don't have a trainer, but we travel with our own gym equipment.
Oh, okay.
And so even then, like, typically the band guys will all get together and we'll either go to a local gym or use that stuff. But even then, that's another hour out of your day,
Yeah.
and you still got, okay, well, now I've got 20 left to kill.
Yeah.
You're sleeping 7 or 8 of those maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a lot of just hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
And I never thought I would miss setting up my own stuff every day, because it's nice to just walk on stage and play. But at least that was something to do. It was something productive. I'm gonna set my drums up and tune them.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a long-winded answer to just say that, like, some of the hard things about touring for me personally in my stage of life are being away from my family, just feeling pretty unproductive for most of the day.
Yeah.
And also just not being necessarily responsible for what my life looks like on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically just wherever we are in the world is where I have to be. Whatever the schedule is, I just have to be flexible enough in my own life, whether it's, missing stuff for my kids, games and that sort of stuff. Just have to be flexible with all that stuff, and just sort of go with the flow on whatever schedule the tour is.
Yeah.
So.
And what time you have to wake up, or if you're doing a morning show or whatever it may be,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the hours are probably kind of crazy at times.
Mm-hmm.
And you're crossing time zones a lot, I would imagine.
Crossing time zones. Air travel is always, it's tough. Like, I would rather be on a bus any day, because at least you have your space and you just get on your bus and it's comfortable. But, we do a lot of fly dates, and it's like dragging Pelican cases through the airport, and you've got 17 people in a big group and trying to get everything, luggage is missing, and like it gets real tiring. And those early morning, you have a 7:30 flight, you got to be there at like 5 a.m. and you were just playing until midnight the night before. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is that part of the reason you came off that first tour? I think it was Luke Combs' tour. You were support.
Yeah, we were support. I was playing for a guy named Jameson Rogers, and it was an awesome tour. It was so cool. It's the first time I'd experienced big arenas like that.
Yeah.
Night after night. It was awesome, but it was exhausting.
Yeah.
Really exhausting. And at some point you go, and I feel privileged saying this, but at some point you go, what else is there to do? Like, I've played big arenas, played Red Rocks and these places that I've always wanted to play. Like, what else am I trying to accomplish? And so I had hit that point. And that's why I was like, I think I'm just going to stay home and refocus life. So, but then fast forward and here I am again.
Yeah. So how much of your life, I think this is good, because there's a lot of people that are, kind of out on the weekends and then back home for those fly dates, right?
Yes.
So can you explain a little about that? I think that a lot of people don't understand how that works. They might think you're out for like 5 months straight on a tour bus, but.
Right. And for some gigs, that is the case. But if we're talking about Nashville specific, that's not the norm. Some of the big pop tours that go out of LA and other places, I do know of bands and stuff that just hit the road and they come home in 6 months. That's not the case for most Nashville gigs. Even the biggest of the big artists typically do what we call weekend warrior stuff. So my schedule during a touring season typically looks like I get on the bus between 10 p.m. and midnight on a Wednesday. We take off, we drive to the destination, show up early Thursday morning, play shows Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night in different towns. And then drive home. We leave immediately after the show. Saturday night on the bus. The bus will roll back into Nashville early morning on Sunday. So I get back to my home probably around or before lunchtime on Sunday. So I have part of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, most of Wednesday at home. And that's a typical week. Sometimes we're out for 2 weeks. The most we've ever been gone is 2 weeks at a time. So it is manageable. Like, I wouldn't do it if I had to be gone for 3 months at a time or 4 months. For me personally, it's not worth it, just where I am in life. This schedule at least allows me to be present for my family half of the week. And that makes it doable for me.
Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning for Luke Dejaynes, to what inspired you to want to play drums in the first place.
That's pretty easy. I've been around it my whole life, since before I could consciously know what was happening. My parents were musicians. They played in bands. Our basement was where they had band rehearsal. And so my earliest memories are being like in diapers watching a band rehearse. And then once I was old enough, band rehearsal would be over. They'd all go upstairs and eat nachos or whatever. And I'd climb on the drummer's drum set. I probably couldn't reach the pedals, but I was just, infatuated with it. So it was a pretty easy thing to just be into. And my whole family's musical. Like you said, my brother plays. So we were just surrounded by that environment. I was 13 years old running sound for my parents' band in bars, shouldn't even have been in there, but
that's awesome.
It's just been my life. So in some ways I kind of just feel like this is just always what I knew. So I'm blessed to say that came easy to me. But also I feel like, I don't know if I ever had a choice. It's just always what I knew.
Yeah.
So.
And then, so like, this is what I'm kind of fascinated with, because we all grow up with these dreams, especially if you start playing at a young age and you're exposed to music. Like my dad taught me how to play guitar,
Right.
you know, and I just wanted to do it because he did it, and I just grew up with it. But then there comes a point where it goes from, I love this, to I need to make money.
Yes.
So you played with Walker and your brother for what you said 2 years for food. Where was the point where you're like, I got to generate some income, you know, I need to make money?
I think that came even before that. It was when I went to college for music, because once again, I don't know anything else. This is just sort of my identity. So I went to college for it, and then got out of college, and it was like, well, all I've been trained to do, all I've done my whole life is music. I don't know if I have a choice but to do this. And it's probably good, because if you do have a choice, you will always do the other thing. I think if this is the only thing you can do, not from an ability standpoint, but just a mental standpoint, like I just have to do music. If there's another option, you should take it, or you will end up taking it. You know, if I had a sure bet, oh, this career would work out great for me, I would probably be there. So there was never that moment of like, oh, now I just got to make money. It was sort of like, this is all I know. I know I'm pretty good at it. I have a lot to learn, but you know, pretty good at it. So this is all I know. The only thing I know to do is put one foot in front of the other and just keep walking down this path and see where it leads me.
Yeah.
Now there was a lot of years of like, I'm not making enough money. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's hard to even know how I got through that.
Yeah.
I mean, I have had a supportive wife my whole career, and a lot of times she was carrying us. So a lot of hard times financially, but the thought never really crossed my mind to quit.
Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about things for myself, because it's one of those weird situations where it's all you know.
Yes.
And this last year was crazy. It was really a hard year, and we had a baby, and there was a lot going on. And I was like, I kind of pulled away from music a little bit. And I heard this quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was basically like, if you're meant to do something, it's going to come back to you. Like, you're not going to be able to avoid it.
Yes.
And for me, it was that exact thing. It was like, I can't not do this.
Yes.
And trying to not do it just brought me back to doing it and wanting to do it with more, fervor than ever.
Yep. I totally agree with that. My youngest, she's 7. She's shown a lot of, she's shown a lot of interest in wanting to sing and play guitar. And, at first I thought it was just a cute little thing, but she's really serious. She's got stacks of notebooks of songs she's written, and I mean, she's into it. So we got her a guitar for Christmas, and I was like, did I just set my daughter up for failure? Like, do I want her to do this? And I was talking to my buddy Seth about this, and I was like, man, I don't know if that was a good move, and he said, it doesn't matter. If she's meant to do this and that's in her, you're not going to discourage it. Whether you buy her a guitar or never show her anything, she will still end up doing it. If it's in her, like it was in me and you and you, it is just sort of a thing that you can't stop. Yes.
So your daughter, your buddy suggested, because I thought about this with my son. Like, he's enamored with a guitar. I pull a guitar out, he immediately gets so stoked.
Yeah.
And I just got a couple of guitars to demo for TikTok shop. And I just gave him the guitars after I used them for a video, and now he's got 2 Tellys, like a mini one and a full-size one. And he's awesome. Obsessed with it. But I had that same thought. I was like, am I doing my son a disservice by putting a guitar in his hands? Because they're like, where's the money at? That's the question.
Right.
And I think that's a good question to ask and a good question to answer, because you've been there, I've been there, and I consider my job one thing and my career another thing. So it's like, all right, for most people in Nashville, on a real level, even if you have, let's say, a publishing deal and you get a draw, you're not going to be able to live off of it.
Right.
I
Not
mean,
well.
the draws are about what they were in the 90s still. You know, it haven't changed, but
Sure.
cost of living sure has.
And most musician pay is the same as it's been in the 90s. And
I
in some
didn't-
cases
yeah.
lower. Studio musicians were killing it in the 90s. And I've heard stories of those guys who were like cream of the crop in the heyday talking about how much less they make now than they did when record sales were huge and they could demand these huge fees, you know?
Yeah. So that's crazy too. Like, the money's just not there like it was because there's no record sales. And so, because of the lack of revenue in music, what do you suggest to the person that imagines they can come here and just like do music and survive off of it? Is that a reality that is attainable, or is the truth, I'm really going to have to like have a side hustle to support my dream?
It's for sure that, at least in the beginning. I know very few people who just land on their feet. But I think the question you should ask before asking yourself that question is, do I love it enough to still do it if the money's not there? Because I think on some level you have to have the talent and the ability, but that's typically not what leads to the career stability. It's usually more just not giving up. At least that's what I've seen. It's, if you can come and weather the storm long enough and you're at least competent, you can typically find some footing. Now, that doesn't mean you've got like super high level gig or whatever, but there is a lot of work here. That's for sure. If you can be flexible about what level that you're on or that you start at and try to work your way up. One piece of advice I usually give is, before you ever think about making a move like that, make sure you've set yourself up to be in the most free place financially that you can. And by free, I don't mean you have to have a lot of money, but you can't have a ton of overhead. You can't have a huge brand new car payment and, you know, the latest iPhone that you're paying $1 billion a month to have, and, you know, just all the little things that add up to you just being sort of in debt to your bills every month.
Yeah.
If you can come here and have that as minimal as possible, you're gonna be able to weather that storm a lot longer before you have to say, I can't afford to do this. I have to go do something else. So it's just sort of setting yourself up for success for the long game.
Yeah. And I think that's what you have to have in mind, is the idea that I'm in it for the long run. It's like what you said, this is the only thing I do, burn the ships kind of a mentality,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where you have to stay, because I think, like you addressed earlier, there were times where you're like, I don't even know how I'm going to make it.
Yep.
Like for me, it's been like, I don't know, like I feel like I'm just getting my butt kicked so hard by life right now.
Yeah.
But then you stay persistent.
Yes.
That's the big thing. You don't give up, because you can't fail if you don't quit.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's not even, excuse me, it's not even a matter of having to stay positive all the time, you know, because there's been plenty of times where I really didn't see how this was going to work, but I just still didn't quit, you know. But that doesn't mean you're always going to be like, oh, I just got to hang in there and everything will be fine. I still don't know. I mean, on some level, I turn around and if I can step outside of myself and look, I'll be like, yeah, you're doing okay. You're in a position a lot of people would love to be in. But when I'm being real with myself, I'm still like, I'm 44. What's my retirement look like? How long can I do this? What happens when I'm not on the road anymore? Is my other studio side and all of that going to be enough to sustain me? I still don't know these answers. I just know I haven't quit yet, and I'm probably not going to.
Yeah.
And I'll just keep figuring it out.
Yeah, it's the one foot in front of another, like you said. And I think of someone once said you could drive the whole night. You could drive from New York to California in the dark as long as you had headlights.
Yeah, that's good.
Because you just have to see that little bit in front of you, like the one foot in front of the other.
Yes.
And you can get there. You're not going to know the whole picture.
Right.
And you have to pivot. And I think that's big too. But at the end of the day, it's going to be one of those things where you just keep going. And then life and the plan kind of unfolds.
Absolutely.
And so for you, moving into the production side and the studio side, tell us a little about that studio that you have and what inspired you to do that.
Yeah. So the studio and recording and producing has been a big part of my life for a long time as well. When I was young, same thing, my family, I was 16 years old and we had a big garage. And in this garage, there was a bass boat, and because my dad would do some competitive bass fishing, and then there was this old 57 Chevy that we were going to restore and all this. And my dad was into all that stuff. But he was also into music and all that. And so at one point he said, you know what, like, he knew, I was into music and my brother and stuff. He's like, he thought it would just be a cool family thing to have a studio instead. So we sold the boat, we sold the car, and we turned that whole big garage into a recording studio. And we built it all. I mean, with our hands, like him and I were in there hanging drywall and building walls and treatment. And so we had that. And, my whole high school years, I grew up having access to a recording studio. I mean, it was old school. We had tape machine. So I learned how to do tape.
That's awesome.
So that was just always something that was familiar to me. And so I knew how to do that stuff, did some of it in college. And I just sort of piddled around with it, but mainly I was like a player. And then I was in a band right out of college. It was my brother and all our buddies from college, and we were in this band for several years. It was a good band, actually.
You guys ripped. I remember you showed me a YouTube video.
Yeah.
I was impressed.
I was proud of that band. There's some great people in that band and great times. Some of my fondest memories in music, honestly, were in a crappy van that would hardly start and would rain in the doors. And so that says something too about your journey, that process. Those are my fondest memories. But anyway, we finally hooked up with a producer in Nashville. He heard us through someone else and was like, hey, I want to work with you guys. So we came down here. The band was in St. Louis. We came down here and recorded with him, and I was just blown away. I was like, the process. I'd never seen a real record being made. Like, we recorded a bunch of stuff at Dad's place, and we made records with local people, and it was cool, but it was basically pressing record and trying to play well, and that's what I knew. And then I went and I watched this particular guy craft a record in the way that a record is crafted, and be meticulous about takes and sounds and equipment and parts and, the whole thing. And I was just like fascinated. So I would play my drum parts, and as soon as I would get my take done and they'd move on to guitar I would grab my stool and I would pull it up as close to him as I could get at his console and just sit there and watch. And he didn't mind. He liked explaining to me what the gear was and the compressors and all that. And so I just remember from that moment on, I was like, I want to do this. This is cool. And so I was super inspired. And then I just started slowly buying my own equipment piece by piece. And then eventually that turned into me being able to build my own space. I called my dad up again. I said, hey, remember when I was 16 and we built a studio? Well, how about let's do that again now that I'm 30 or whatever, Yeah. So we did. We built a space. It's out behind my house, and I'm so fortunate to have it. I love it. It's very cool. Oh, thanks, man. I'm blessed.
Because I've been there a bunch of times.
Yeah, we worked on.
And you would have no idea from the outside what's on the inside.
Yeah.
And you go in there, and you have your control room. You have ISO booths. You have the main room. Mm-hmm. And you've got the glass.
I got the glass. That glass actually came out of a McDonald's store.
Really?
Yeah. My father-in-law owns some McDonald's stores, and they were tearing one down when I was building my studio. And he's like, I've got 3 huge panes of glass that's really thick. I was like, great. That's my control room window.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, I'm so grateful to have that space, and it's kind of just my little safe haven. I go out there and I can just be creative and make things and work with awesome artists, that come in and need help.
Yeah, let's talk about, because you're totally switching roles from going from the player to the person behind the console.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, being a player, it really helps you understand the other side, vice versa. I think knowing the terminology as a musician or a player, like even just in communication, if you're on the road and you're talking to monitors or in front of house or whatever it may be,
yes,
you know the language.
Yes.
And I think it helps as an artist when you're in a studio and you know the language instead of some super vague way to explain something. You can actually use the correct terminology to explain something.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's been an asset to you. But my big question is, how do you, because I this kind of bugs me, like people say, are you here to be an artist? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And it's like, what are you? Are you a songwriter or are you an artist? And I'm like, everybody shut up. Like, do you realize that everybody's an artist?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And being excellent in a recording studio or being able to track something the correct way, mixing, mastering, I mean, you go through the list, that is 100% an art form.
Mm-hmm.
And just like you had that first experience on that record recording, he was an artist that probably did things his way. How did you develop your way of doing things?
Well, that's a great question. Something I'm still figuring out, to be honest. Which leads into a little bit of the larger conversation. What you just brought up is people in this town, and probably all over the world, they want to put you in a box. They want to be able to label you and put you in this tiny category of Stefan's just a songwriter. Stefan's just a guitar player. Luke's Walker Hayes drummer. Or Luke's just a recording engineer. Or, it's always... And I understand that. People that's how our industry works. There's categories and boxes and awards for very, unique roles.
Yeah.
But zooming out, I think that's one of the things that's helped me survive this industry is I can wear multiple hats. There's been very few times in my life where one of those hats has completely provided for me. So I think that's a big asset. Now, the risk you run there is then you're never necessarily seen as the master of any of it. You know what I mean? It's sort of jack of all trades, master of none idea. And also, it's hard once you do get put into a certain category to have people see you in another light. So I just had this conversation before I came here today, ran into a guitar player friend at a coffee shop, and we were talking about this exact thing. It's like, you even have to be careful like what you post. And I'm really bad at social media, but I have to be careful about what I post because it really informs just what everyone else in this town thinks that I do.
Yeah.
So if every picture is me like on the drum riser with Walker, then I'm just going to be Walker Hayes drummer to everybody.
Yep.
And they're never going to call me for anything else or think of me in another light. And even outside of music, like I want it to be bigger than that. I want it, when you call me, usually we talk about music. Yeah. But you know me on a more personal level than that. You know about my life, you know about my family,
Yeah.
And so I want to be careful to like make relationships a little bit deeper than just that.
Yeah.
I just got way off track of the question.
No, I think that was great though, because I was asking, about the whole artist thing.
Yeah.
And people want to put a hat on you and the fact that you've had to wear multiple hats in order to be able to support yourself. I feel like that's something I've had to do as well.
Yeah.
And it's almost vital, especially, when we talked about money and how to make it, you have to. So I'm kind of, as a musician, reevaluating my whole theology on recording as of late. because of Rick Rubin.
Okay. Yeah.
Just because the book came out, we were talking about before we started.
Yeah.
And his thought process on art, he says, think of the audience last. Like, he says things that are like real out of the box, that are very anti the machine, anti Music Row. He's not in the business of, being a hit factory as much as he is in the business of creating art.
Yes.
And he says, if you go after that, then you're going to have the best song. Mm-hmm. And then that's going to be the thing that people want to hear, because people don't actually know what they want to hear.
Correct.
So with that being said, I've been, recording with you, and you've done so many sessions with so many artists over the years where you've been behind the console, and then you come in and you grit out drums and you quantize them and everything's perfect. Mm-hmm. And then you're tuning vocals, and everybody just expects perfection because you're going up against records that you're hearing that are perfect. And what you hear on the radio is perfect, and what you hear on Spotify is perfect. But when I think about the records that stand the test of time, they are the records that are imperfect. Yeah, they comped stuff back then with tape.
Yeah.
Like, they use different parts of different takes. I actually found out Vince Gill told me he comped a lot of his guitar solos, which I didn't know. Like, I always thought it was like you have to play it top to bottom.
Yeah.
But he would be like, I would take this part and that part, and we'd slice the tape, and then it would be one, and then I'd have to go back and learn the solo that I wrote.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of cool. It gave me a little grace for myself
totally.
for doing that. But all that to say, it's like, where are you at in your vision of where music's headed in terms of the generation coming up? And they're almost gravitating towards music that's more organic and human.
Yes.
What do you think?
Man, this is a great discussion. This is great, at least for me. I love talking about this stuff because it's something that I wrestle with, because I agree with Rick Rubin. When you just focus on art for art's sake, that's when you're really going to get special stuff. I agree. That's just assuming that I'm afforded the luxury of just doing art for art's sake. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not. That doesn't mean I don't agree, because I do. But we are talking about, if you're talking about coming to Nashville, you're probably talking about coming here, not just, you can make art anywhere. You can be in Alaska and be an amazing artist of any sort. The reason people move to Nashville is because there's a huge commerce side that is attached to some of the art here. And our dream is to do both, right? Mm-hmm. Is to do the art and pay our bills doing it. That's the dream. It's not even to be rich. It's just to, like, I just want to support myself doing my art. The problem is there's this pendulum sort of thing in there that they don't necessarily coincide. The more artistic isn't always the more money. Sometimes you do. You strike gold. You've got to, I don't know. There's been a lot of artists through the years who've just broke the mold and just done their thing, super artistic, and then everyone's like, that's genius, and it makes a bunch of money. But that's not for most of us. I would love to think that's possible. But so where I'm at is, at least as a producer, I'm speaking as a producer now, is I try to really get in touch with the artists that I'm working with and figure out what's the magic piece that they have. And sometimes that magic piece is they're really great at fitting in this lane that's very Nashville machine-y. Like, they can do it as well as anybody. And it's going to go out and it's going to play on the radio and it's going to compete with Luke Bryan and this and that. And so then I know that's what their lane is. And I just have to, like, do the best job I can for that. And then there's other artists that it's like, they're just an artist. They don't care who hears this. If it ever blows up, they're just oozing this expression. And so then my job is to, like, find what's magical about that and hopefully maybe figure out how to give it a little bit of a nudge so that it's a little more commercially viable, so that more than just their mom and sister are going to want to listen to it.
Yeah.
I do think, I agree with you. I think humanity is coming back into music. So like you said, back in the day, They still had tricks and tips for fixing things and whatever, but it was, for the most part, there were flaws. There was more humanity in it. And now with technology, we can dehumanize everything from a vocal performance to a drum performance. It can be computerized on a grid, perfectly pitched, no fluctuation. And I think we got that technology, which is awesome. I'm not bashing any of that stuff. I love the ability to be able to manipulate performances into something a little more pleasing,
and it feels good on the artist side to come out with something that sounds perfect to play for people, because artists are insecure.
Yes, you're right. We all are.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to have the ability to just touch up our flaws. But it's like anything. It's like Photoshop. It's like anything. It's like we can take away all the flaws and give me perfect skin and body and whatever. And it sort of makes you feel good because you feel like you're presenting this like perfect thing. But is that why people are connecting to you? If I met you on the street and you weren't perfect, that has nothing to do with our connection as people. And I think it's the same thing with music. The connection to people is something deeper than the perfection. Mm-hmm. Like the perfection may catch their ear, like this is really done really well and clean and polished. But
that's a good quote. The connection's better than the perfection.
Ooh, and it rhymes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. I'm always searching for that magical connection. Why are people going to be drawn to this? And that's almost never because it's perfect, like you said.
Yeah. So how do you feel like it's turned out for the artists that you've worked with that have chased country radio? Because we're in Nashville.
Yes.
And they're bringing you a reference track or a few, and they're saying, I want to cut a record and I want it to sound like this. And then you make it and it sounds just like that. Have they had success with that or not? And I'm talking big commercial success.
Right. I would say mostly no. And even if there is a bit of it, it is so fleeting that it was never worth it. Because I've worked with all kinds of artists. There's some artists who just say, I don't care. I don't care if people think I'm a sellout. I just want to sound like everything else on the radio, make as much money as I can. And I'm like, hey, more power to you if you know that's just where you're at.
But did they end up making money?
Not that I've worked with personally, no.
Yeah.
Those come out and they sort of get around, and then there's no deeper connection. So even if one song came out and did okay, there's no substance that draws people back in to be real fans. So I do think on a headier level, it's figuring out how to connect with people. And that's everything from the songwriting, the artist and what they stand for and what they're saying, down to what plugins I'm using on the mix. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I try to think of it in that way of like, what compressor here is going to bring out the thing that connects people to this music? Am I bringing out a compressor that like cuts off all the transients and smooths things out, or am I using one that like still hits people in the chest when they hear this and that makes them want to move and connect to it? Those are like super nerd out sort of things, but it's still, I try to keep that in my mind rather than just, this is the process.
Yeah, and that is the art.
Yes.
Being a producer and an engineer. Mm-hmm. And the people on the listening side don't understand what goes on behind the scenes before they hear that finished product.
Right.
But it is people like you who are having those, thought processes as they create the record to create something that's going to connect with their audience. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
That you go that detailed on something.
I think that's, and I'm still chasing it too, but I think that's the thing that will eventually, when you asked a little bit ago about like, how do I come around to my way of doing things, my way of expressing my art? It's that. It's learning my craft so well that I know big picture what is emotionally connecting with people and how I can enhance that. Because it's tempting to see all these commercially successful songs and mixers or producers or whatever and not want to try to copy them, and just say like, well, this is what they use. This is how they recorded it. These are the sounds they got. So that's not being fair to the artist that I'm working with or the emotion that they're trying to convey. I'm just chasing what other people are doing because it was successful. And like you said a minute ago, that doesn't work. Like that's what the business side wants to do. And that's my biggest gripe with the art versus commerce battle that we all fight in this industry is, and I get it, business people, they just look and they say, okay, this worked, this made a lot of money, this is the formula. That's how most business works. Like something successful, you model after that. Unfortunately, that's not how good art is made, And so I can understand where they're coming from, but it's really hard when your A&R people and your record labels just say, we just need more songs that sound like this because those were hits. And in my mind, the real question is, how can we do something that's not like any of that so that it reaches people in a new way, a new emotional level, or makes this person have a different connection to the audience? I don't know how to marry those things. If I had that answer, I'd be like in a private jet somewhere right now. But I think that's the big thing we're all wrestling with as artists versus like commerce and making a living.
Yeah. So with the commerce and art, you have almost two sides of the coin. And I think one of the people that broke the mold for country music is Chris Stapleton.
Yes.
And we all just know that he's the best.
Yeah.
Like you can't beat that voice, and his songwriting's phenomenal, and that's just the bottom line.
It's just a real deal.
He's just unique. He's the real deal. And I think there's a lot of other artists that are the real deal, like T-Pain. He just came out with a record. I was watching his concert. The guy has a phenomenal voice, and everyone hated on him for using autotune, but it was artistic for him. So he kind of introduced autotune to the world in an artistic way, but nobody knew that he could really sing. But he actually is as good as anybody at singing. I think he probably must have, he probably grew up singing gospel, or like that's the vibe I get.
Yeah.
But on your tour, you guys, because Walker's more on the pop side. Talk to me a little about what that's like in terms of running the show from start to finish versus a Stapleton or a John Mayer even, where he is gonna take solos longer, or he's gonna head nod the band for things versus something in your ear saying chorus or counting you in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's. Once again, there's so much room here. I try to embrace all of it.
Me too.
Because I think there's value in all of it, and there's so many unique identities in music. We have our Chris Stapletons who are just oozing talent, and they can't help but be the best at everything, and everything's just raw, and I am who I am. And then there's other people who are just who are great entertainers or great at engaging a crowd and writing a clever hooky song. And so, I mean, we could talk about the differences forever. So on our tour, it is very production heavy. I mean, wicked production heavy. And there are certainly haters on that. And I understand why. Here's how I look at it. If you're using that stuff to supplement a lack of talent, I do have a little bit of beef with that. Although you could still talk me into why that's necessary. But in our case, Walker's a great singer. Sings great. Sings in tune. He's got an awesome pocket. His rhythm and stuff is great. He's a great guitar player. Our band is awesome. The guys are killer players. But there's three of us. It's drums, my brother on bass, and Nick, our guitar player. And then Walker plays acoustic 10% of the time. Mostly he's just singing. And so we use a ton of tracks to fill it up, because if you listen to his records, there's
Crazy
layers.
productions.
It's
Yeah.
layers. And it's the type of music that has layers. If you're the John Mayer trio and you're playing Jimi Hendrix covers or whatever, you expect to hear a ripping guitar and a bass player going nuts and a drummer like holding the whole thing down.
Yeah.
And that's the genre and the vibe and the thing. And yeah, John looks at the guys and they play 4 more minutes of solo. And that's awesome. Our kind of music is built with layers and layers. There's probably 120 tracks in the recording session of one of those songs. So it's impossible for us to play that song and it sound like that song with one guitar, a bass, and a drum kit, you know? And so we use those tracks to supplement the extra parts and the layers that make it feel like the thing the crowd's familiar with, you know? And so, but beyond that, the technology is insane. Our tracks computer runs the guitar pedal boards even, so it'll switch the patches for the guys. And you're like, well, that's dumb. You know, why can't you just switch your own pedals? Well, we play on really big stages, and sometimes the guitar player is way out on the end of the thrust. It's a 25-second walk for him to get from this position for his solo out there. He doesn't have time to kick his distortion pedal on and run half of a football field to the end of the thrust to do his solo, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of like necessity for us to do stuff like that.
Totally.
You know, there's all kinds of weird drum loop sounds that aren't real drums. And so we have triggers. I have trigger pads that go to the computer and they have all those program sounds on them. And I play those so that it sounds like the drum parts from the record. And then I'll play the real drums on top of it. And so I could go on and on with examples, but.
And then you're sending time code to all the videos and I'm imagining. Right?
Yes. So when we hit the last note of a song and all the lights go black perfectly in time and the video puts up, you know, whatever graphic at that moment, it's all tied to that. And it has to be. I mean,
it's dope in an audience. I saw Charlie Puth when he was in town. I'm a big fan.
Totally.
And he's an amazing musician. I like watching him on TikTok, and he makes really like cool, just like, he's very creative. He's a very creative dude.
Yes.
But his live show was incredibly track heavy. And he could do it without tracks, but with the tracks, it's what you hear on the record.
Yep.
And I preferred it with the tracks, even though the guy's got pipes for days and could just play with a piano and his voice. The tracks make it what you want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And the people showed up for a reason. It's because they heard the songs, something about those songs connected with them. And a good amount of that connection may have to do with just how the song musically made them feel or had a certain vibe to it or whatever. And you have to kind of recreate that, you know, and you want to take liberties and make it even bigger and more over the top live. So it's a new experience, but you have to have the core fundamentals of what made that song feel the way it did. Sometimes that's just not possible. Now we could so Justin Timberlake is a great example of this. I saw him on the 2020 tour when they came and he's got like a 20-piece band or something. Insane. Guitars, horns, singers, the whole thing. He doesn't need any tracks, but I knew his monitor engineer, and he's like, oh, we have like 128 tracks running along with this huge band, you know, and it was incredible. They could have done it without that, but every gap was filled perfectly. Every emotion was just like accentuated because of like the layers and the, you know, the orchestration and the tracks and the production, the lighting, everything was so put together. So what you asked a second ago about the show top to bottom is, for the most part. So I'm Walker's music director, so I have to essentially put the session together. For the most part, when our show starts, everything is connected to that computer, the lights, the video walls. We have some manual things, but everything is tied in. It's got to be on that grid. And so our show starts, and there's only about 2 moments in that whole 90 minutes where that computer stops, and he can just kind of off the cuff talk to the crowd as long as he wants or whatever. Otherwise, everything's timed on a grid. And
then there's probably a cue for you to start it back.
Yes, when he says So that's why I wrote this song or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Then the playback guy goes, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how a lot of tours are. And that rubs some people the wrong way. But I think a lot of times it's just a misunderstanding of that. I think people who aren't super familiar with that see it as like cheating. And like I said, it's not to supplement the lack of talent or ability. It's to just enhance something, take it from here to just an incredible experience.
Yeah. So what would be your top 3 pieces of advice to be simple? Top 3 pieces of advice to someone that moved to Nashville to pursue a career in music.
Yeah, trying to keep them simple.
And should they even move to Nashville, or should they stay where they are? Because if it's art and commerce, you know, like we talked about, well, then maybe you want to be here, but you probably have a better chance at making money playing in a cover band back home where you live.
100%. You will, until you hit a certain threshold, you'll bleed money trying to do this.
Yeah.
For a while. I would say, might take me a minute.
And what do you think about Broadway? Like, let's start there. Because, I mean, like, we played on Broadway together.
A couple times, yeah.
Yeah, and so to me, it's like, what do you think about that in and of itself as from a musical standpoint? And I think a lot of people that haven't moved here or even been here don't understand what Broadway is because they have a romanticized idea of Broadway.
Yeah.
But on the musical end, you can get stuck there.
Yes. So I made a conscious decision not to do that scene. We did play it a couple times, but we weren't playing it as being part of the scene. Like the artist we played for had a couple gigs down there.
Yeah.
It is its own musical scene here in town. There's a group of musicians and they all just trade shifts. It's like washing dishes at Waffle House or something. It's like, hey, can you pick up my shift? You know,
My first Waffle House experience was with you. You took me there.
In Florida.
In Pensacola.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. I just had to throw that in there. I just remembered that.
It was probably like 3 a.m. and
Yeah.
That's right. But yeah, it's its own scene and it's not for me. I'm not hating on the people that do. I have good friends who they've supported themselves by being down there and you just have to know all the cover songs. You're basically entertaining tourists. And that's okay. That's totally fine. There's no judgment in that. It's not my scene.
And on the songwriter and singer-songwriter end, it's not in my opinion, great place to build fans.
No.
Some drunk girl might like follow you on Instagram and forget who you ever were or whatever, you know?
Yes. I work with a few artists, and they're doing an artist thing, but they play down there a lot. And I do see it's a struggle because it is hard to make real fans. You're seen as a lot more of just being an entertainer versus an artist.
Mm-hmm. Versus going to the Bluebird and watching someone.
Yes. It's a different thing. But there is a financial piece to it to where if you just love to play the piano, if you just want to wake up in the morning and all you care about is just playing the piano, I mean, it's a way to go play every night of the week and be paid for it. You can be really busy, and you can pay your bills doing that. And so if that's what motivates you, then like it's a great opportunity.
Anytime that you're playing for someone, there's a level of when would this end, or when does their flame burn out, and
Yes.
what does that look like for my career?
Yes.
You know, not everybody's going to be Toby Keith's band,
Right?
He's had on staff forever. You know.
Yes.
Even like during COVID, they all got paid, and it was great, and they're salaried, and
Right.
And some of the big acts are they're paying per show, but most of the big acts I think salary their players now. Mm-hmm. I would say.
Yeah.
But still, there's that fear that it's like I could lose my job at any time.
Yeah. And that's why, back to our conversation earlier, it's hard to figure out how to not just be Walker's drummer, because at some point that is going to go away for me, for whatever reason, whether it's my call or not. And so, yeah, it is important to wear a few hats and figure out how you can have a little bit more control of your own path forward.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm coming from with the different hats and the production side and the mixing and the studio and whatever else I do. I taught for a long time, like you said.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like I have a little bit more of, it's just eggs in baskets is what it is.
Yeah, totally. You're diversified.
Yeah.
It's like any investor in a portfolio. For the most part, they want to be diversified. Because if this tanks, then you have something else, another vertical that's going to create revenue for you.
Yes.
And
I've
been very impressed by you in that you haven't turned your Instagram feed into a, look at me, I'm on tour with Walker Hayes.
Yeah.
Because it would be very easy to get those photos, because I'm sure they're taken every night, and post new pictures every day and go after major drum sponsorships. And you could go that route, and there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people utilize it, and it helps them in their career, and they leverage it, and they squeeze as much as possible out of it. But I think what you said is coming from someone that's very mature in the music business and understanding the global picture, the macro versus the micro, which is I don't want to just be Walker Hayes drummer for the rest of my life.
Yes. And that's not because, I love Walker. He's dear. It's not because I'm like embarrassed or like don't want to be.
And it's a cool thing to say, if anything.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on tour playing drums for Walker Hayes. I'm his music director.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something to be proud of.
Yes. And I am proud of it, and I'm grateful for it. But this goes back to your question a minute ago about some advice. One of those things is, whatever this looks like for you, is to not find all of your identity in it. And that goes to what you just said. I have a great gig, but I've learned as I've gotten older to not put all my identity in that. And then even zooming out a little farther, not even to put it all in my music career success in general. That was a long, hard lesson to learn that I'm still learning, because I still struggle with it hard. And I know we all do, I think, some level.
Yeah.
But as I'm looking in the next chapter of my life, you start thinking about this weird stuff when you hit that mid-40s, because you're like, I'm definitely halfway done in this whole thing. But you just start thinking about what the time that I have left, what do I want that to be about? And I still am super passionate about and driven about music and accomplishing more goals and doing things. But I've done this long enough to know that that's not going to be the ultimate source of my identity and contentment. And so like, if I don't learn how to balance that now, I'm going to end up at the end looking back going, I'm not sure what I just spent all that time doing.
Do you feel like you know what your ultimate form of identity is?
It's probably different for everybody. For me, the answer that I want it to be would be my faith in God and my family. I fail to keep that in perspective a lot of times.
We all do.
Yeah.
It's easy.
But when I do keep it in perspective, it makes everything even out way more. The lows aren't as low. Like when somebody doesn't want to work with me anymore in the studio because they are working with somebody else, or they didn't like a mix that I did, or I had a bad show, or whatever those lows are that can really tear you down and make you question yourself. Those don't get as low, because that doesn't define everything about me. A bad night on the drums, or a bad mix, or a unhappy client, or it sucks still, but it doesn't tear me down to my core, because that's not all that I stand for. But it's just hard to not let it, it's hard to keep that perspective sometimes.
Yeah.
And it also like, it lowers the peaks too. So in a good way, because it's easier to not think too highly of myself either. Like, oh, I've got this pretty cool gig and I'm playing these places that people would wish they could play. It keeps the roof on my ego a little bit more too, just keeping that all in perspective, because that's also not what defines me. My successes in this industry are also not my identity. So it kind of just like flattens that out a little better in a healthy way, I think.
Yeah.
But
keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
I feel like you're very grounded, but I also feel like it's a maturity thing, because the people that I've met in the music business that have been the kindest and most grounded have been some of the most experienced and successful musicians.
Yeah. Vince is probably like that, huh?
He is
him a
very,
bit.
yeah. Very, very grounded in every way. Like, you would sit down and have breakfast with them or whatever. It's like just sitting and talking with you, you know?
Why do you think that is? Because a lot of times you think, or I think this way, maybe I'm missing out on something because I'm not that ruthless, like whatever I got to do to get to the top kind of mentality. And sometimes it almost appears that way, that people who are more cutthroat or whatever do get those spots because you were just the nice guy and didn't step on someone to get there, or, you know, that's a weird thing. Sometimes it's like,
I think character is going to win in the end. Like, he told me, back to Vince, and this isn't me being braggadocious.
No, it's great.
But at breakfast, he told me a story where he had the opportunity to sing for this national commercial, but it was like very last minute. But he had already committed to playing on record for someone else.
Okay.
And he said, I can't, and he wasn't getting paid to play on this record, but it was for a friend.
Just a favor, yeah.
Yeah. I forget who it was, a very famous artist. She's in the Hall of Fame. And he chose to do the commitment over the high-paying gig. And he said he would have made, I forget what it was, but I mean, it would have like set him up, you know? And this was a point in his career where he had been in LA, moved to Nashville, wasn't having success, didn't have his big hit yet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like turning that down to do the right thing says a lot about a person. I feel like there's a lot of insecurity in musicians.
Yeah.
And again, all artists are insecure, all human beings are, but a lot of the younger players I've met have been a little more uptight maybe, or like stuffy.
Yeah.
I feel this way personally. This is my experience, because they have something to prove.
Yeah.
Because there's an insecurity. It's like, I have something to prove.
Yeah.
And then you talk to the seasoned musician that's already proved, you know, and then it's like, I don't have anything to prove. I've already proven myself.
Yeah.
So I am not, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the vibe's very different.
Yep.
So that's what I've experienced personally. I don't know if you've experienced that at all, but
No, I have. And I mean, I've certainly been on both sides of that. There's
Yeah.
been plenty of times I feel like I've got to try to prove, you know, even later into my career, there's been moments of I've got to prove to this person what I'm capable of or whatever. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being ambitious and going after opportunities and really trying to like prove yourself. But once again, it kind of goes back to like you said, character, and what do I want to be known for? Like proving myself in that situation, or being someone that someone thinks I showed them some kindness or did them a favor, or, you know, just was there for them in a time that they needed help.
Yeah.
That's probably going to last a lot longer than like me impressing someone in a very specific moment where I had to prove how good I was at something.
Yeah. And we all want to prove ourselves. I mean, Guitar Center is a perfect example of this. You know?
Yeah.
Like, you go to Guitar Center, and that is humanity in a nutshell. But at the same time, I think that it's the job of people as, you're talking about you're aging. Well, you're going to be carrying the torch for the next generation of drummers that end up being out with the big acts, with the big hits on the road. And so using it as a place to be able to pour into people, to teach lessons, life lessons, and character lessons versus, just I'm awesome, look at me, I think is really cool. And that's that macro perspective.
Yes.
And that being kind of like not just finding your identity in being a drummer or a musician or whatever.
Or successful.
Yeah. Because success is fleeting for everyone. And
it's a little bit fake too, because what everyone perceives as success may not feel very successful to the person in those shoes.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I know that there's a lot of musicians that have been at the height of their career. Back to Rick Rubin, he said he got a call on the Beastie Boys album. It was the biggest in the country. And he said he remembers at that moment that it was the most depressed he had ever been in his entire life.
Wow.
Was in that very moment when he got that phone call.
Yeah.
So just because it looks from the outside on Instagram a certain way and it's face tuned and whatever, auto tuned, or they look great or whatever, doesn't mean it is that way. A couple last questions. Thanks for being here, man.
Of course.
These are my fun rapid fire. I just make up on the spot questions.
Okay.
If there was one artist who you could produce a record for, who would it be?
Who? Honestly, I would have no business even in this room, but it would be Stevie Wonder. Because the guy is just like an oozing musical mass of a human being.
Yeah.
And I just want to be in the room to help capture some of all that like musicality that he can play everything. I could just sit back and let him play the drums and the keys and the bass and, everything. But he's one of those people where the thing I don't enjoy about producing sometimes is when there's no musical vision and I have to, as the producer, sort of like come up with that. The dream is when you have an artist like Stevie Wonder who just has all this talent and all this direction and all this, he just has this thing that just oozes out of him. Then all you have to do is capture it, harness it, and just make sure it's the best version of that it can be. And so someone like that, I would really enjoy being in the room with, just to soak up a little bit of that.
That's a great answer. I had to teach you a ton too.
Oh yeah.
That'd be a great education right there. All right, next question.
Okay.
You're stuck on an island. You have one record that you get to bring with you. What's your...
Huey Lewis and the News, the sports album.
Ooh.
Easy answer.
I love that.
Easy answer. Yeah, I grew up... Huey was the first artist that, you all had that thing as a kid when you're like, something just hits you different and you're like, I want to be like that. And for me, it was like hearing, that's the generation I grew up in, was Huey Lewis and the News and that sports. I still have the tape. I got it when I was a kid.
Wow.
That record came out in 83, I think. And I have the same tape that I owned as a kid. It's cracked and stuff, but it's on my speakers at the studio.
Oh, I'll have to try to find... Yeah, I'll have to see that next time I'm down there.
Yeah.
Because that's awesome, man. Because I love it. Dude, that me and you, the last couple things we've done together have been kind of 80s.
Yeah.
So here's a question. Me, as an artist, there's the chasing the Nashville thing, and then the person creating art just for the sake of art that doesn't care if anybody hears it. They're just doing it because they got to get it out of them. Where do you find me in that spectrum?
Well,
there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious because I thought that when you said that, it made me think, because I'm always evolving, as we all are.
Sure.
But your experience with me,
what do you
think? It's just selfish question.
Well, yeah, and a selfish answer would be that I typically gravitate towards artists like you and the records that I want to work on, because I think there has to be an element of both for it to feel satisfying. And what I mean by that is, well, for me personally, on a satisfying note, it's not fun to make a record that no one will ever hear because it's so freaking weird that like you wouldn't even show it to anyone. Maybe it's super artistic, but it's like no one's going to connect to this, or the audience for it is in some third world country or something.
Yeah,
you know,
it's their mom,
and
dad,
totally.
Yeah.
Even if it's good, you know, it's still got to relate to other people. So it's motivating for me to work on something that is artistic, but does have a bigger mass appeal to where it's like people, just normal people who listen to your everyday radio stations or whatever, can still find a relatable aspect to this music, you know? And I think that's where you fall too. It's definitely not down the center to where it's like cookie cutter. This is like what all the hits in Nashville sound like. Mm-hmm. But it's not even sort of on the perspective of like, this is out there. This is way left field. You know, I'd say it's totally relatable to the people who listen to the down the middle stuff, but it doesn't sound like everything that they listen to.
Yeah.
And I think that's an awesome line. That's where I would encourage most artists to try to live, because you've got to be unique. There's already a Keith Urban, right?
Mm-hmm. Preach.
You're not going to out Keith Urban. And this goes for every aspect of the music industry. I think about that because this last year, my focus has been, I want to learn to be the best record mixer that I can be. That's been my focus, is mixing. And so me and my buddy talk about this stuff a lot. And, you know, you listen to these other guys' mixes, these big giants in that industry. And a big lesson that we learned was like, there's already Chris Lord-Alge or whoever in that world. There's already a Pharrell producer. You're not going to out Pharrell. So you have to find your unique lane, what makes you unique, and bring that out, but still in a way that connects to people, you know, because this isn't it's just not an isolated industry. It's very community based. Mm-hmm. And if you're not connecting with other people, then you really just are doing art for art's sake, and that's commendable. But I think for most of us, we want validation from other people.
If you could leave this conversation with one piece of advice,
okay,
for the person listening, because I know this is going to help a lot of people, and they're interested in the Nashville move, or they're here and they're hungry. Mm-hmm. What do they need to know? What's your biggest takeaway for them?
Well, when I used to teach at the college, the biggest thing that I wanted them to leave knowing was that it's way more important what sort of person that you are to people is going to way outweigh the amount of talent that you have or don't have. There's a phrase in this town, it's probably not just in this town, but it's the hang, right? The hang is how you get the gigs. The hang is how you keep the gigs. Mm. You may get hired on a gig because you're an amazing virtuoso guitar player or whatever. But the minute you get on a tour bus and you sit in close proximity to a bunch of people for 48 hours and you're kind of a turd, they're just not going to have you back. So it seems like a very obvious and like that's not a helpful piece of advice, but I would argue that it's the most important thing. I've seen it play out over and over and over. The guys on the big gigs are super talented, don't get me wrong, but I know guys better than them who are doing nothing. And it's because they can't hang. Like the people just don't want to be around them. They're not helpful. They're not uplifting. They're just negative. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe that I've been at least able to keep gigs. I've never been fired from a gig or lost a job or anything. And it's not because I'm so much better than everyone else at all. There's so many people better than me in this town. But I think it's because people find it at least somewhat enjoyable to be around me, or find me helpful. You know, they think it's better to have me in the room than to not have me in the room, and not just because of my ability, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Because you can be the best in the world, but if you bring bad energy or bad vibes, people won't want to be around it.
No, and it's a relational business.
Yeah.
So you're never isolated in this industry, no matter what part of it you're doing.
Yeah.
It's relational, and if you get the relational part right, you can get a lot further than you could just on pure ability.
Yep. Well, the hang's been great with you today.
The hang has been great. Yes, sir.
And it's always been great.
I know. It's awesome to see
But
you.
yeah, I appreciate your time and pouring into people.
Yeah.
And answering my questions and pigeonholing me in a spot musically.
Yes.
Thanks,
No, it's been awesome. Thanks for having me, dude. I was excited when you asked me to do this.
Thanks for sticking around with me and Luke. We've had amazing guests, and we're going to continue to have amazing guests, and you are going to help make that happen. So on your socials, please share it. Let's keep getting people listening to this podcast. My goal is to give back. My goal is to help. And I always thought, how could I help people? And what would the younger me have asked the older me?